Hello, my name is Aaron.
Hi,
Yeah, what's up, Aaron? And I can't stop watching franchise media. I didn't realize that it was a problem until I watched The Flash. Now, I've been kind of back and forth on the superhero stuff recently. I'm still far into Marvel, and I've been committed to that since day one, which we'll get to why eventually. DC I go back and forth on. I didn't watch Shazam, but I did watch Flash because of a promise that I read on Twitter that was not worth the price of the ticket. But we'll get to that too. We're jumping ahead of ourselves here. Look, why don't we just take it back to the very beginning, where it all started. Spider-Man. Sam Raimi's 2002 Spider-Man film is probably my most formative experience. I was too young to see it in cinemas, but I owned the DVD of it. I think I rewatched that movie so many times growing up. It was like the one that I would just keep going back to over and over again. And I remember being very young because the Green Goblin in this movie terrified me. There's a scene at the beginning when Norman Osborn injects himself with the serum and turns into Green Goblin. I'm putting it behind me. That was so scary that I had to go into scene selection. Remember scene selection? That was the thing. I'd have to go into scene selection and start the movie from the scene after that because it would scare me too much. You can see it, right? It's terrifying. I'm happy to report I rewatched the movie recently. It didn't skip the start. So I've grown, I think, as an adult. But there was something about that first Spider-Man movie that just grabbed me. It's a mix of it being really funny, being really campy and really comic booky, and just really fun. It's something nostalgic about it still to me. The music is great, the performances are great, the writing is fun. It's a movie that knows what it is. It's a comic book movie in every sense. It doesn't try to be too serious. And so ever since that point, I've been kind of into the superhero thing, you know? But this was back in the early 2000s. The only thing we really had at that point was Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies and the X-Men movies. X-Men movies, I still rewatch, but not to the same extent. I didn't really start to love the X-Men until they rebooted it with the younger cast, with First Class and stuff like that. I think First Class is probably the one X-Men movie I've seen more than any of the other ones. But Spider-Man put me down a path, and it was a superhero-based path. And I didn't really see many more superhero movies than that, except for the DC animated films. Now, the DC animated stuff, I still think is really great. Stuff like Batman Under the Red Hood, a lot of the older animated DC shows like Justice League Unlimited, the animated Batman series, eventually Batman Beyond, as well as the Justice League movies, such as Justice League Doom, The Flashpoint Paradox, which we will get to, and other movies like that really kind of brought me into the superhero genre. Now, at this point, it's kind of more towards the later 2000s, and Iron Man comes out. I watched Iron Man as a kid. I don't think I remember going to the cinemas to see it. It wasn't a big deal. I wasn't really into the major Marvel stuff until the second phase, when Iron Man 2 and Captain America and stuff like that started to come out. Iron Man and Hulk kind of passed me by. I think I was still a little bit too young and still watching like the classic stuff. It was a little bit too serious for me. But eventually, as I kind of started to buy into this Marvel stuff, that became the superhero stuff that I would rewatch. Iron Man 2, my brother and I have watched so many times, and I love it because of that. There's something really nostalgic to me about Iron Man 2 in a very different way that the Spider-Man movies are. The Spider-Man movies then also get rebooted here. This is the Andrew Garfield era. I have a distinct memory of going to see the first Amazing Spider-Man movie in cinemas, and there's the scene where Lizard gets his arm back for the first time, and my brother must have been like 8 or 9, and I remember him being so grossed out by it that he had to like leave the cinema, and so he had to like go out with my mom and stand out in the foyer because he was too scared of it. It's interesting how like that kind of comes back. It was me in Green Goblin, Spider-Man 1, and then it was my brother in The Amazing Spider-Man, but he has more of a nostalgia for those movies, whereas I have more of a nostalgia for the Raimi stuff. I'm not sure why. It's only a 3-year difference, and yet maybe those formative experiences that he has of something that is so memorable as being frightened by a movie kind of stick with you. And I think that's what kind of I've been chasing ever since then. It's that reminder of what it was like to watch Spider-Man for the first time. and getting that vision and seeing, oh my goodness, look at how much fun this movie is. I'm really enjoying myself. I'm being taken on this roller coaster of emotions of excitement and fear and action and romance, and it's all encapsulated in this one movie. And I think a lot of the early Marvel stuff does a lot of a similar thing. It keeps that camp. Whiplash as a villain in Iron Man 2 is hilarious. It's still campy. It's still fun. But ever since the beginning of the MCU, as many other people have said, this creation of interconnected storytelling started to become successful. And I think Marvel has every right to claim this. They did a great job of setting up an established universe that connects to and from itself. I like to joke that the reason why I still watch Marvel content today is because of a commitment I made when I was 12 that I still have to live up to. And it's a joke, and it gets a good laugh because a lot of the stuff nowadays that Marvel puts out is not of the same high quality of some of their stuff. One movie, maybe a year, is great, and everything else is mediocre at best. And that's fine. You can't pump out that many movies without some of them not being so great. But as the MCU got more interconnected, and with the release of Avengers, suddenly this kind of interconnected storytelling and commitment to a franchise I started to see as becoming required. My friends and I would religiously go and see every single Marvel movie whenever it came out within the lead up to Avengers, and then post that as well. To this day, I still watch every single Marvel movie that releases, for good and bad. Most of the time, it's not good. And at this point, I started to become more involved in the comic sphere. Now, this is probably 2012, 2013. I would read comics every now and again just because I was like, oh, this is just like the stuff that I'm watching. I might as well read the comics because then I also know a little bit more of the backstory. And I think this was important for me. I liked seeing the way in which the comic book movies are very much comic book movies, unlike a certain special director who says that they're theme park rides, and he's right to a degree. I think that comic book movies, above all else, are comic book movies. The way that comic book storytelling works is that you have this overarching narrative that is then interconnected with a lot of singular issues of different characters going on different journeys. Sometimes they interconnect with each other, sometimes they don't. You don't have to read every single issue of Marvel Comics. You just need to follow the ones that you like. And I think that's a great way to approach the films. I don't know why it took me until now to realize the same separation where I can only really watch the Marvel movies of the characters I want to see more of. I don't need to see Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania because the last movie I wasn't really interested in, so why would I continue with characters that I don't think are going to be important? But it's because Marvel has started to sprinkle importance into every single thing. That's part of the draw. No comic book claims to have the arc of the story in every single issue. However, Marvel has kind of established their movie sphere as having an important part of lore building in every single film. And this has created a sunk cost fallacy. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically like you've invested too much into something to pull out. And that's kind of how I feel about a lot of fan engagements. And that's not just Marvel. We'll get into the other ones as well. But at this point, I'm so committed that to kind of back out now would just be a waste. And that's a bad way to look at things. There's a reason why the sunk cost fallacy is something that is a fallacy and is wrong and you should not be doing. It's mainly used to describe gambling addiction, and so to relate it to watching movies is probably a very problematic comparison, but you know. But there was a point where I was going to stop. At the end of Endgame, I think me, as well as a lot of fans, thought, well, great, that's a perfect way to finish this arc that has happened now since 2008. There's no real way to go from here. The movie that came out directly after that was Spider-Man, and yeah, sure, we were all going to watch Spider-Man because it's Spider-Man, and great. But after that, no one really had anything to see. And so then Disney also decided at this point to release the Disney Plus shows. Now, I was interested in WandaVision since its first trailer. I'm a big sucker for like that kind of meta-commentary type television series. And so I was like, look, this is a show that I like that's probably going to just be within a Marvel type context, and that's fine. I'll watch that, and that'll be it. So I watched WandaVision, and I enjoyed the first 4 episodes, and then it turns into like classic third act Marvel stuff, and that's okay. That's what it's always going to be. But then I stopped. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was coming out, and I thought, I'm not really going to watch that. So I didn't, and I just went about my day. Until one time when my cousin, who might be watching this right now, shout out to you, cousin, who put me down this path, said, hey, have you watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier yet? And I said, no, I haven't. And he goes, oh, that's okay. I just wanted to talk about it with someone. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to watch all of these, aren't I? Because I need to stay in the conversation. And so I went back and I watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and it was fine. There's things I liked about it. I definitely think it was worth watching. But since then, I have watched every single Disney Plus show because I've gone, oh, but I really enjoy talking about things with people. And as a result of wanting to talk about things with people means you have to watch the things that people talk about. Which then brings us to Secret Invasion. I sat down to watch the first episode of Secret Invasion, and it started this whole kind of like existential crisis of, actually, you know what? I don't really want to watch this. I like espionage TV shows. Andor was fun within the Star Wars setting. But the thing about the Skrulls is that if everyone can be anyone, then the mystery of the espionage isn't really that interesting, because at any point the show can just go, just kidding, that person was a Skrull the whole time. That's not great, and it's very difficult to write around those constrictions. And the show was fine. It's like a, fun espionage-y action type show. But 3 episodes I think have come out as of the recording of this video. And every week I sit down and I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. I have to do this week. That's not great. I feel like I'm obligated to watch Marvel content now. Funnily enough, my cousin hasn't watched much more after Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So whenever I bring up something and I say, have you seen this? He usually goes, no, I haven't watched it. And I'm like, oh, okay, fair enough. I mean, fair enough. But the Disney Plus shows proved to be somewhat important. I feel like you probably needed to watch WandaVision to understand Multiverse of Madness. These aren't just subtle, separate comic book storylines that eventually will come over to a large overarching narrative. No, these separate issues and separate characters do end up overlapping a lot more than they do in traditional comic book storytelling methods. The thing that I really like about comics is that they just assume that any issue is somebody's first comic. I don't think that's the case with Marvel movies. Marvel movies assume any sense of prior knowledge. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff in comics, like shorthanded ways of saying this is actually referenced in this issue, go and read that one, or that you could just look it up online. And yes, everyone has at some point after a Marvel end credit scene goes, oh, who is that? And gone and Googled up whoever is going to be in the next movie, because nobody knows, really. It's usually some obscure comic book character that nobody's ever heard of. But now Marvel has had a commitment to fan engagement that is no longer about storytelling, and is more about creating more fan engagement. Let me explain. Spider-Man No Way Home is one of the greatest cinematic experiences I've ever had. I went watching that movie. Everyone kind of assumed that Tobey and Andrew were going to be in it. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen Spider-Man. It's been like a year now. I feel like I'm okay talking about that. But we didn't really know that they were going to be there. And the crowd erupted when they showed up on screen. Seeing old villains, seeing the Green Goblin that scared me as a child now no longer scare me was incredibly exciting. That's an experience that I haven't had since Endgame. However, as a movie, Spider-Man Far From Home kind of falls apart. It's not a great film, but it isn't trying to be. It is very much an amusement park. It's something that puts you on an emotional ride, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. I still think it's incredibly valuable to have that as an existence, but the movie relies so heavily on old engagement to stuff that has already happened that that's what the movie bases itself upon. And I think that is very emblematic of a kind of wider problem with the rest of the industry. So let's pivot now to the other two kind of major IPs, which I think are also falling into this trap. And that is the DCEU and Star Wars. So the DCEU, I guess, is the easiest comparison to make between Marvel. After Marvel started to do really well, the DCEU tried to make their own universe with Zack Snyder, which we all know fell apart. Eventually, Joss Whedon makes Justice League, ends up doing really badly. Zack Snyder makes his own version of Justice League, which is better, but still not great. And then eventually we get to The Flash. Now, I'm not counting Shazam. Shazam is in its own little pocket of whatever. But The Flash, in and of itself, is based upon this same idea of metatextuality. Spoiler alert for The Flash. Now, I went to watch The Flash because on Twitter, I saw that Nicolas Cage was in the movie as Superman. Now, this isn't enough to watch a movie. And I know this. But I thought, whatever, it'll be fun. I might as well just go and see it. The Flash is a bad movie. I don't think it was worth my time at all. Nicolas Cage is in it in like a weird CGI version, which was completely overshadowed by the fact that they resurrected Christopher Reeve in a way that was so uncomfortable to watch that it immediately ruined any other sort of cameo that shows up in the movie. But the entire movie is built upon these cameos. Wonder Woman shows up for 1 second and then literally just flies away. Ben Affleck's Batman is there for a bit. The movie ends with George Clooney showing up in the new universe and is like, oh, look, another Batman. That's not an ending. I watched that and I was like, really? This is what we're doing now? Are we just bringing in things that people recognize and go, look, here's a payoff. Here's a payoff for a thing that you watched ages ago. Remember this guy? Remember this? But the thing that I really didn't like about The Flash is how much it just tries to be a worse version of the DC storyline, The Flashpoint Paradox. Ever since the movie was announced, people were starting to speculate how similar it was going to be to the Flashpoint Paradox story in the comics. Now, for those of you who aren't like massive comic nerds, the Flashpoint Paradox is a story where the Flash travels back in time and finds that a lot of things have changed, and he blames his nemesis, Reverse Flash, for doing it, and he tries to figure out a way in which he can kind of rectify the past. However, plot twist, it turns out that he was the one who caused the rift because he went back in time and saved his mother. Now, the Flashpoint Paradox is a kind of a weird DCEU fan fiction where there's a lot of stuff that happens that, you know, Thomas Wayne is Batman because Bruce is the one who dies, and Wonder Woman and Aquaman are at war because of a feudal struggle, and Superman didn't land in Kansas. He was like intercepted by the government and kept in a tank. And so all of that kind of stuff is more, well, this is kind of like alternate universe DC stuff. And the Flash kind of hints at a lot of those elements of storylines. An older Batman in Michael Keaton, a super-S character being kept and trapped in a kind of government lab, but it doesn't actually do any of the main story stuff that make Flashpoint interesting, which is the idea that Flash blames someone else for a problem that he ends up having. Instead, the live action The Flash just makes a weird reference of, oh, look at all these other things, look at this alternate reality world, and in the end it's he is his own villain, but there's multiple Ezra Millers. I was joking with my friend after watching the movie that maybe they should have brought in Grant Gustin, I think is his name, who plays the Flash in the CW show, as opposed to having two Ezra Millers. But I don't think this goes against literally everything I've just spoken about just putting people that we recognize into movies now and going, that's enough. Because having the two Flashes go back and forth is not enough to justify this entire film. I came back home after watching The Flash and rewatched Flashpoint Paradox. And Flashpoint Paradox is just a better version of this story. The Flash feels like a lesser version of a story that's been done well, but has been reworked to fit as much fan engagement and references as possible. Star Wars is having a similar problem right now. The Mandalorian arguably was the best revival that Star Wars could ever have. It's a brand new universe with new characters set post anything, not connected to any ongoing storylines, and instead continues this classic style of Star Wars storytelling. A lot of people fell in love with Grogu or Baby Yoda. A lot of people enjoy the narrative that The Mandalorian went on. However, from season 2 of The Mandalorian, it quickly started to shift to no longer be a standalone story, but in fact become a continuation of the Clone Wars storylines. Star Wars took their one property that was the most beginner-friendly and immediately made it require prior knowledge. The Mandalorian spends a lot of time fleshing out characters that have pre-existing backstory from 6 seasons of Clone Wars and more in Rebels. New fans to Star Wars don't have the same level of engagement with these characters that people who are longtime fans of them are. This is part of the problem. The Mandalorian's references aren't subtle, they're clear character drawings. If Ahsoka shows up in Mandalorian Season 2, people who don't know Ahsoka's character just go, okay, and like what is it about this? I can't remove myself from that as someone who knows Ahsoka's character. If you do, leave a comment below and say, actually, I really like The Mandalorian Season 2 and 3 and Book of Boba Fett because knowing nothing about the characters, I still enjoy them. And that's fine. I really hope that people can still do that. I just worry that the more in which these massive studios are creating major IP shifts, that the requirement to watch everything is becoming a requirement as opposed to a suggestion. This changes the shift. If people have to watch Rebels and have to watch Clone Wars in order to understand the new Ahsoka show, it isn't fun anymore. Engaging with fan content shouldn't be a chore, it should be a desire. And I worry that we're getting to a point where that line is becoming blurred. Marvel, Star Wars, and DC are now more interested in how they can make stuff that is interconnected than create stuff that is interesting. And the reason why is obvious. Marvel made a lot of money doing this. It's free marketing, basically. But when there's so many other things to watch that are deserving of our time, is it really worth us watching something that we feel like we have to? Thank you for watching this. This is a bit of a kind of more... I didn't script this. It was kind of just more like I had talking points and I wanted to address like things that I've been thinking about. The Flash really weirded me out in like a cinematic level. So I don't know. Hopefully you found this interesting. If you did, like, comment, and whatever, and share. Yeah. Leave a suggestion of a movie or a TV show that isn't connected to an IP that you think is worth somebody's time. That's it. Thank you.